Before there were planets, before there was Earth, there was only dust. But not the kind of dust you sweep from a shelf or brush from your clothes. This was star dust, ancient and timeless, the last breath of the sun's long dead. Each grain was a fragment of eternity, iron forged in supernovae, carbon born in stellar hearts, oxygen woven in the fire of red giants. Together, these grains drifted through the newborn solar system, carried in the glow of a young, restless sun. This was the dawn before the world. The sun was still young then, not yet steady in its brilliance. It flickered and flared, sending out torrents of radiation and bursts of wind. Its light was golden white, its surface restless with storms. Around it swirled the leftovers of its own birth, a protoplanetary disk, vast and sprawling, stretching billions of miles in every direction. The disk was a mixture of dust and gas, glowing faintly with the sun's reflection. From afar, it might have looked like a halo, a luminous ring encircling the new star, but within it, conditions were anything but serene. Winds blew, collisions sparked, fragments drifted and collided, and among them, the first whispers of planets stirred. Earth did not yet exist, but its ingredients were here, scattered as dust, waiting for gravity to bring them together. The dust of this disk was not uniform. Some grains were silicate, the raw material of stone. Others were metals like iron and nickel. Still others carried ice, water, carbon dioxide, ammonia, frozen at the disk's outer edges. They had traveled far to be here, carried inward by eddies and currents, nudged by the pull of larger bodies and shaped by the heat of the sun. Each grain was older than the solar system itself, forged in events unimaginably distant in time. To drift here was to carry history, the memory of stars that had long since vanished. If you could hold one of those grains, you would be holding the ashes of another sun, the relics of another age. These grains were not yet a planet, they were only potential, but they were patient and gravity was waiting. At first, their unions were small and delicate. Two grains drifted close, brushed against one another, and clung with a faint electric attraction. Another grain joined them, and then another, until they formed a tiny clump. Elsewhere, another cluster grew, then another. Across the disk, such gatherings multiplied, microscopic bonds, fragile but steady. From the outside, it looked like nothing at all, but within each cluster was the beginning of something vast. Dust was learning to stick. Over thousands, then millions of years, the clumps grew. They collided gently, bouncing and spinning, sometimes shattering but more often merging. Dust became pebbles, pebbles became stones, and stones became boulders. The grains of starlight were becoming the seeds of worlds. The disk was crowded with these clumps, drifting endlessly around the sun. They followed its pull, circling in wide orbits, each one a traveler on the road to becoming. They collided often, but the distances were still immense, and patience was demanded. If you could drift among them, you would hear nothing, no sound in the vacuum, but you would feel their presence. Shadows would cross your path as larger clumps drifted by. You would see collisions as silent flashes, a boulder breaking into shards, or two merging into a larger mass. And always, in the distance, the sun's light would glow through the haze of dust, turning the whole disk into a golden fog. It was a world not yet born, but already alive with motion. As the clumps grew larger, their collisions became more violent. Where once they had bounced like snowflakes, now they struck like stones. Pebbles shattered into fragments, only to merge again in time. Boulders cracked, melted, and reformed. Each collision released energy, heating the fragments, igniting brief flashes of fire. Some clumps endured, growing steadily larger. Others were destroyed, their pieces scattered back into the disk. It was a trial by collision, a test of persistence. Only the strongest or the luckiest would survive. Among these survivors was the seed of Earth. In one region of the disk, where conditions were just right, a cluster began to dominate. It pulled in neighbors with its growing gravity, absorbing pebbles, stones, and boulders. Each addition made it heavier, each impact scarred it deeper. Its surface was battered, cracked, and molten, but it endured. Over millions of years, it grew larger than its neighbors, sweeping its orbit clean of smaller bodies. It was not yet Earth, but it was no longer only a cluster of dust. It was a protoplanet, a worldlet, hundreds of miles across, glowing faintly with heat. It was the dawn of Earth's becoming. If you could have looked out then, you would not have seen planets like today. There were no green continents, no blue oceans, no white clouds. Instead, the night was filled with drifting light. Dust reflected the sun's glow, turning the disk into a luminous fog. Collisions flared like sparks, brief glimmers of energy in the darkness. The proto-Earth itself glowed red, its surface molten, its shape imperfect. It was young, fragile, scarred, but unmistakably alive with potential. Nights were not dark, they were filled with the light of becoming. The process was not quick. Millions of years passed, each one filled with collisions, mergers, and destruction. Entire worlds of stone were born and lost in the blink of a cosmic eye, yet slowly, steadily, the proto-Earth endured. It gathered more mass, pulled in more fragments, and grew larger than any of its neighbors. It was scarred, battered, and forever molten, but it persisted. It was patient, and patience was all the cosmos required. The dust had become stone, the stone had become a sphere, and the sphere had become a worldlet on its way to being Earth. And so, at the end of this long dawn, something new stood where only dust had been. It was not yet the Earth we know, but it was the beginning, a world of molten rock, glowing faintly in the sun's light, clearing its orbit of debris, gathering itself into permanence. The dust had found its destiny, the dawn had become a planet. This was the beginning of Earth. The solar system was still young, still chaotic, still raw. The sun burned fiercely at the center, sending its light through the haze of the protoplanetary disk. Around it circled billions upon billions of tiny grains, stardust, rock, and ice. They drifted silently, their paths slow and circular, their motions endless. And among them, something subtle was happening, a whisper of change, so quiet it might have gone unnoticed if not for the patience of gravity. The dust was beginning to gather. At first, there was nothing remarkable in their drifting. Grains floated, crossing one another's paths in silence. But occasionally, rarely, quietly, two grains touched, not with violence, not with sparks, but with the gentlest embrace. A faint static cling held them together, a bond of electricity born from their tiny charges. They did not drift apart, they remained, and with time more joined them. Elsewhere in the disk, the same thing was happening. Two became three, three became a dozen became more visible against the sun's light. The grains were clumping, slowly, delicately, building something greater. These were the whispers in the disk, the first small signs of planets to come. The clumps of dust grew into motes, each one larger than the sum of its parts. They were fragile, a stray collision could scatter them back into grains, but they endured. The disk was filled with these motes now, drifting like embers through the haze. They circled the sun in endless spirals, nudging one another, colliding, sticking, or breaking. Some grew steadily larger, others perished and reformed. Each mote was insignificant on its own, but together they were the first steps toward worlds. From a distance, the disk looked serene, but up close, it was a storm of motion. Grains collided by the millions every hour. Some bounced apart, others shattered into fragments, but many stuck, their weak clings reinforced by time. Imagine drifting within that storm, clouds of dust stretching in every direction, the sun glowing faintly through the golden fog, and everywhere around you, grains colliding and merging. You would hear nothing, but you would feel the constant impacts, the endless motion of a world becoming. The storm was silent, but it was relentless. Over time, the motes grew into pebbles. Each was a collection of countless grains, bound together in fragile unity. They were no longer invisible, they cast shadows in the sun's light. They drifted as individuals, their weight giving them presence. The disk was filled with these pebbles, billions of them, colliding constantly. Each collision carried more energy than before, breaking some apart but making others stronger. The survivors grew, their bonds tougher, their structures more resilient. It was the first quiet act of selection. The cosmos was choosing which fragments would last. The growth of these pebbles was slow. Thousands of years passed like whispers, millions of years like the turning of a page, but gravity is patient. The sun's pull kept the disk bound, ensuring the grains could not escape, and within that circle, the pebbles gathered more companions with each orbit. In time, they grew to the size of stones, then boulders. Collisions became louder, more violent, but also more productive. The survivors grew larger still, their gravity beginning to matter, pulling in even more fragments. The whispers of dust had become the murmurs of stone. If you could have stood among them, you would have seen a strange horizon. Not land, not sky, but endless floating stones drifting in every direction. Some were the size of your hand, some the size of mountains. They crossed one another's paths, colliding, shattering, or merging, the slow-motion ballet of a cosmos at work. The sun's glow turned the haze golden, but shadows fell deep behind the larger bodies. The disk was a realm of light and shadow, fire and silence, creation and destruction. It was a night without stars, but filled with glowing embers of stone. Some of these clusters grew so large they could no longer be ignored. Their gravity pulled in smaller neighbors, their collisions melted surfaces into glowing patches of molten rock. These were the first planetesimals, the seeds of future planets. Not all survived. Many collided violently, shattering into fragments. Others were flung into the void, exiled from the disk forever, but a few endured, growing larger with each passing millennium. Among these survivors was the seed of Earth, gathering quietly, unseen, but unstoppable. The disk, once filled with dust, was changing. The smallest grains were disappearing, consumed by pebbles, stones, and planetesimals. The fog was thinning, replaced by larger bodies. Order was emerging from chaos, structure from haze. The whispers had grown into voices now, the voices of stone, calling out to one another with every collision, every union, every new fragment of mass. The disk was no longer only dust, it was becoming a nursery of worlds. The journey was only beginning. The pebbles that survived were stronger than those that had perished. The planetesimals that endured were larger than those that shattered. The survivors carried forward the story of persistence, a story written in dust and stone. Earth's seed was among them, already growing, already gathering, already destined to become something greater. The whispers of the disk had given way to murmurs of stone. Soon, those murmurs would become roars. And so part II closes with the disk no longer a cloud of dust, but a field of stones and planetesimals colliding endlessly, building the first true seeds of planets. The whispers of beginnings had become the murmurs of becoming. The next chapter would bring louder voices still, the gathering pebbles, when fragments grew into worldlets and Earth's seed began to show its strength. The whispers in the disk had grown louder. Dust had become motes, motes had become pebbles, and pebbles were now becoming stones and boulders. The haze of starlight grains that once filled the solar system was thinning, replaced by a restless crowd of rocky bodies, each circling the sun in slow, deliberate orbits. The disk was no longer a fog of dust, it was a storm of stones. Imagine looking across the breadth of the disk then. Instead of the soft, golden haze of dust, the sky was crowded with fragments. Pebbles the size of your hand drifted in endless fields. Stones, the size of houses, spun slowly in the void. Boulders larger than mountains loomed in the distance, their shadows falling like drifting eclipses across the haze. The sun glowed dimly through the cloud, its light scattered by countless surfaces. Sometimes, the silhouettes of vast clumps would pass across that light, dimming it for moments at a time. The disk had become crowded, busy, alive with the motion of matter. And among those fragments, the first hints of worlds were stirring. The pebbles and stones did not drift peacefully. Their orbits crossed, their motions carried them into one another's paths. They collided, sometimes gently, bouncing like drifting leaves, sometimes violently, shattering into shards that sprayed across the void. Larger stones drew smaller ones toward them, their gravity faint but persistent. Over time, clumps gathered, forming larger and larger bodies. Some grew to the size of mountains, glowing faintly red from the energy of their collisions. These were the first real steps toward planets, planetesimals large enough to hold themselves together, to resist shattering, to begin sweeping their orbits clean. The whispers of dust had grown into the rumbling of stone. Not every pebble survived. The storm of collisions was relentless, and many fragments were destroyed before they could grow. Some shattered into dust, returning briefly to the haze before being swept up again. Others were flung from the disk entirely, hurled into the cold reaches of interstellar space, lost forever to the newborn sun. But some endured. Each survivor carried forward the story of persistence. Each was a little larger, a little stronger, a little more stable than before. The survivors grew faster now, their size granting them strength, their gravity drawing in more companions. The disk was becoming a battlefield where size was survival. In one region of the disk, a body began to outshine its neighbors. It was not the largest in the solar system, not yet, but it was steady, persistent, and growing quickly. Its orbit was stable, its collisions survivable, its gravity increasing with every new fragment it absorbed. This was the seed of Earth. At first, it was only a cluster, little different from its neighbors. But with time, its persistence became clear. It grew where others broke, it endured where others shattered. Its orbit cleared slowly, its mass pulled steadily more material inward. The Earth was not yet born, but its heart was already beating in the persistence of this seed. The seed grew larger still, becoming a worldlet, a protoplanet hundreds of miles across. Its surface glowed with molten scars from collisions. Lava seas bubbled across its plains, and its crust, if it could be called that, was constantly remade. Each new impact both wounded and nourished it. Craters scarred its face, but each crater brought more mass, more gravity, more strength. The worldlet was battered, but it grew. It was still fragile, still one among many, but it had begun to distinguish itself. The Earth's first true shape was stirring. Elsewhere, other seeds were growing. Mars was forming nearby, smaller but persistent. Venus, larger than Earth at this stage, gathered its mass in another region of the disk. Even Mercury, small but dense, claimed its place. The inner solar system was a crowded nursery of planets, each competing for matter, each striving to grow larger than its neighbors. Collisions were constant, destruction inevitable, but from the chaos, the survivors emerged stronger. Earth's seed was not alone, but it was destined to become the greatest of them. From the surface of the growing worldlet, nights were unlike any night we know. The sky was filled not with stars but with stones. Meteors streaked constantly across the heavens, each one a fragment of the disk burning in descent. Impacts were frequent, the ground trembling with every strike. Lava glowed across the plains, ash filled the skies, and the horizon was lit by fire. It was a restless world, but it was alive. Each night was both destruction and creation. Each impact was both wound and growth. The Earth's seed endured, and that endurance was everything. Millions of years passed in this storm. Entire generations of planetesimals were born and lost, but the survivors grew, and among them, Earth's seed flourished. It was now large enough to shape its own destiny, its own orbit, its own future. The whispers of dust had grown into murmurs of stone, and those murmurs were now becoming the roar of worlds. The dawn of Earth's becoming was no longer only a promise, it was a presence. A small world glowed in the disk, battered but enduring, scarred but alive, its future written in every impact that struck its surface. The disk still raged with collisions, but within it order was forming. The pebbles had gathered, the stones had grown, the planetesimals had emerged. And among them, Earth's seed had become a worldlet, one that would never again be just dust, one that would never again be just fragments. The Earth was gathering itself, slowly, patiently, inevitably. The next chapter would bring even greater storms, the first collisions, when worldlets themselves would clash, and the young Earth would be tested by impacts that could destroy or transform it. The disk of stones had grown restless. Pebbles and boulders no longer drifted like quiet embers. They had gathered into larger bodies, planetesimals hundreds of miles wide, glowing faintly with heat, circling the sun in competing paths. And now, those paths were beginning to cross. The time of whispers was over. The age of collisions had begun. The inner solar system was no longer filled with dust, but with a chaotic swarm of growing worlds. Dozens of protoplanets circled the sun, each with its own orbit, each with its own hunger. They ranged in size from mountains to small moons, each one glowing faintly with the scars of its birth. But orbits are fragile things. A slight tug from a neighbor, a resonance with Jupiter's gravity, or the nudge of a passing planetesimal could alter a path. And when paths crossed, collisions were inevitable. It was not a matter of if, but when. When two planetesimals collided, there was no gentle meeting. They struck at speeds of miles per second, their surfaces exploding in molten sprays, their cores tearing into one another with unstoppable force. Sometimes both bodies shattered, their fragments scattered back into the disk. But sometimes they merged, their masses fusing into a larger, stronger body. It was survival of the largest, written not in quiet growth, but in fire and destruction. The Earth's seed was among these collisions, battered again and again, but each time it survived, it grew. Imagine standing on the surface of that young seed world. The horizon glowed with molten rivers, and the ground trembled constantly. Then, in the distance, a new light appeared, not a star, not a storm, but another world rushing toward you. Moments later, the sky erupted. The impact shook the planet to its core, throwing mountains of rock into the sky, filling the atmosphere with ash and fire. Lava seas spread across the plains, swallowing whatever crust had formed. The world became an ocean of molten stone once more. And yet, when the fires dimmed, the seed was larger, heavier, stronger. It had endured the trial. Not all were so fortunate. Many protoplanets perished in these collisions. Some shattered completely, their fragments scattered into the asteroid belt or hurled into the outer solar system. Others lost so much mass they dwindled into rubble, their stories cut short before they could become worlds. The disk was littered with their remains, broken fragments, scattered dust, wandering shards. Their destruction fed the survivors, who grew larger from the wreckage. The Earth's seed was among the victors, but its survival was not without cost. Each collision scarred it, each impact remade it, each victory was a wound. Every great impact melted vast regions of the proto-Earth. Entire hemispheres became oceans of fire, glowing seas of magma that stretched for thousands of miles. The crust, thin and fragile, was obliterated again and again. The air above shimmered with heat, filled with vaporized rock. Ash and molten spray formed glowing arcs across the sky before falling back as rain of fire. Nights were never dark. They glowed with molten light, thundered with impacts, and trembled with quakes. It was a world remade every few million years, a planet whose story was written in cycles of fire. And yet the Earth's seed grew. Each impact added mass, and with mass came gravity. With gravity came strength, the ability to hold onto more fragments, to pull more neighbors inward, to sweep its orbit clean of rivals. The Earth's shape became rounder, its mass more centralized, its presence undeniable. It was no longer a cluster or a fragment, but a growing sphere, a true worldlet that could not easily be undone. Its destiny was becoming clear. This was no minor planet, no lost fragment. This was something greater. But the Earth was not alone. Other protoplanets circled nearby, each vying for dominance. Mars gathered its mass to the outer edge of the disk. Venus grew larger than Earth in its own orbit. Mercury, small but dense, forged itself closest to the Sun. Collisions were constant, and every survivor bore scars. Craters, fissures, and molten plains covered their surfaces. From afar, the inner solar system glowed like a forge, its worlds half-formed, restless, and violent. Earth was only one among many, but its path was leading it toward greatness. As Earth's seed grew, its pull reached farther. Pebbles, stones, and smaller planetesimals were drawn inward, captured by its gravity, added to its body. The larger it became, the hungrier it grew. In time, it swept clean much of its orbit, absorbing rivals or scattering them into other paths. The disk was no longer filled with countless small bodies. Many had been consumed, many destroyed, many exiled. What remained were the survivors, the destined few who would become planets. Earth was among them, scarred but thriving, battered but growing. On Earth's surface, the collisions never ceased. Nights were lit by fire, meteors streaking across the skies, impacts glowing on the horizon, lava fountains erupting from fissures. The ground shook constantly, quakes rolling across molten plains, mountains rising and falling in the span of days. It was not a place where life could cling, not a place of peace or permanence, but it was a place of becoming. Each scar was a step forward, each wound a mark of survival. The Earth was alive in its chaos, a world forged in endless fire. And so, through endless collisions, the Earth's seed grew stronger. From a cluster of dust, it had become a protoplanet. From a protoplanet, it had become a worldlet. And now, from the fire of collisions, it was becoming something larger still. It was not finished. More impacts awaited, more scars, more trials, but its destiny was clear now. This was no fragment, no lost stone. This was a planet in the making, one that would endure, one that would thrive. The whispers of dust, the murmurs of stone, the roars of collisions, all had led to this, the dawn of Earth as a true world. And so part IV closes with Earth standing battered but growing, scarred but enduring. The first collisions had not destroyed it, they had made it stronger. The path ahead was still violent, still uncertain, but the Earth was no longer fragile dust. It was a survivor, a gatherer, a becoming planet. The next chapter would bring even greater chaos. The storm of stones, when collisions became constant, and Earth's growth would accelerate into firestorms of unimaginable scale. The Earth was no longer dust, no longer only a drifting cluster. It was a worldlet, battered by collisions, scarred by fire, glowing in the young sun's light. But the age of gentle gatherings had passed. The disk was filled with restless bodies, large and small, and their orbits were crossing more often, their collisions more violent. What began as whispers had become murmurs. What had become murmurs was now becoming a storm. The skies of the early solar system were filled with travelers. Dozens of protoplanets circled the sun, their paths crowded and unstable. Asteroids tumbled between them, comets drifted inward, fragments and shards swirled in every orbit. If you could have stood on Earth's surface then, the horizon would never have been still. The sky was alive with motion, glowing stones streaking through the atmosphere, fragments falling like constant rain, fireballs burning brighter than the moon ever would. Nights were not dark, they were lit by meteors and impacts, the air filled with ash and fire. The world was under siege. Every few centuries, sometimes every few decades, Earth was struck by bodies the size of mountains. Some were small, leaving craters miles wide. Others were vast, tearing open entire regions, flooding them with magma. Each strike shook the planet to its core, sending quakes across continents of lava, filling the skies with vaporized stone. There was no recovery, no peace between impacts. The scars of one collision were barely cooled before another arrived. The crust never had a chance to stabilize, never a chance to harden. It was broken, melted, and remade again and again. Earth was a planet of wounds, its history written in fire. The impacts poured so much energy into the planet that the surface was an ocean of molten rock. Even when the crust thickened, it cracked open again with the next strike. Lava plains stretched thousands of miles, glowing like embers under stormy skies. The seas of lava hissed where water tried to gather, boiling it into clouds of steam. Ash fell like snow, blanketing the molten plains in shifting layers. Lightning flickered constantly in the volcanic clouds, illuminating the landscape in flashes of silver and red. The Earth was not a quiet place. It was a furnace, an ocean of fire under a storm of stones. Every impact shattered the crust further. Mountains that rose one day were obliterated the next. Valleys that stretched for miles were filled with magma. The planet's skin was fragile, torn apart with every new collision. But beneath the destruction, there was growth. Each impact added mass, deepened Earth's gravity, and increased its strength. The very blows that scarred it also nourished it. The Earth's crust was shattered, but its core was growing. It was a paradox, destruction as creation, wounds as nourishment. Not all protoplanets endured this storm. Some were shattered completely, their fragments cast into the asteroid belt or scattered into the void. Others merged with larger worlds, disappearing into their masses. But Earth survived. Each collision left it scarred but larger, battered but stronger. Its mass grew faster now, its gravity pulling more fragments inward. The more it endured, the more dominant it became. The Earth was learning to survive not by avoiding the storm, but by becoming stronger within it. Seen from afar, Earth glowed like a lantern. Its surface was molten, its atmosphere thick with ash, its skies lit by lightning and meteors. The sun's light reflected from its molten seas, while impacts sent glowing arcs of vaporized stone into space. The Earth looked less like a planet than a star's ember, a glowing coal drifting in the young solar system. And yet, within that glow, a planet was being forged. The storm of stones was its crucible. On the surface, nothing was still. The ground trembled constantly, quakes rolling for miles with every impact. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, their plumes rising into the clouds. Rivers of lava split the land, consuming whatever crust tried to form. The Earth was in motion always, its body restless, its skin fragile, its interior boiling with heat. It was not yet a stable world, it was a planet still becoming. And yet, every quake was part of its growth, every eruption part of its nourishment. Through the fire and chaos, Earth grew. From a small worldlet, it had become a planet hundreds of miles larger than before. Its gravity pulled more fragments inward, its orbit cleared of rivals, its mass undeniable. The storm of stones was still raging, but Earth was emerging from it stronger, larger, more stable than its neighbors. It was no longer just another protoplanet. It was becoming something more, a true planet, one that would endure long after the storm had passed. The storm destroyed, but it also created. Every impact scarred the Earth, but also fed it. Every wound healed into growth. The Earth was not weakened by the storm, it was strengthened. This paradox defined the young planet. It was born not from peace, but from violence, not from stillness, but from chaos. The storm of stones was its trial, and from that trial, it was becoming the Earth. The storm would not last forever. In time, the collisions would slow, the protoplanets would stabilize, and the solar system would settle into order. But for now, Earth was still within it, still enduring, still growing. The storm of stones was not finished, but already it had done its work. Earth was no longer fragile, no longer a seed. It was a planet, scarred but strong, a world of fire that would outlast the storm. And so Part V closes with Earth battered, but enduring, scarred but stronger, forged in a storm of stones that would shape its destiny. The next chapter would bring a new stage, the hungry sphere, when Earth's growing gravity began to dominate, pulling in its neighbors and claiming its place as one of the true planets of the inner solar system. The storm of stones had battered Earth again and again, melting its surface, shaking its crust, filling its skies with ash and fire. Yet each blow, each wound, each scar had made it stronger. Its mass was larger now, its pull deeper, its hunger greater. The Earth was no longer only enduring the storm, it was feeding on it. Gravity is patient, but it is also relentless. With every fragment Earth absorbed, its pull deepened. With every impact, its reach extended farther into the disk. Small stones that once drifted past now curved toward it. Larger planetesimals that once ignored it now felt its tug. Earth had become a hungry sphere, a body that did not simply endure the storm but sought it out, pulling the storm inward to nourish itself. The more it consumed, the more it could consume. The region of the disk where Earth circled was crowded still. Fragments, rivals, asteroids, and worldlets shared its path, but Earth's gravity was now strong enough to clear its orbit. Smaller bodies were pulled in and absorbed. Larger ones were deflected, hurled into new paths, sometimes into the sun, sometimes outward into the asteroid belt. One by one, Earth's rivals were eliminated, either consumed, destroyed, or scattered. The Earth was carving out its domain, claiming the space around it as its own. Day after day, century after century, fragments rained upon the Earth. Pebbles fell in showers, stones in storms, planetesimals in devastating blows. Each one added its mass to the growing planet, each one deepened its pull. From the surface, the skis never rested. Meteors streaked constantly, their trails glowing as they burned through the thickening atmosphere. Some ended in brilliant flashes, others in thunderous impacts that shook the world. The ground was littered with molten craters, glowing scars of the planet's endless hunger. Earth was feasting, and its feast was fire. Earth was not the only hungry sphere. Other protoplanets circled nearby, each gathering mass, each striving to endure. Some collided with Earth directly, their bodies merging into its growing mass. Others were flung aside, cast into eccentric orbits where they dwindled into fragments. One by one, the rivals vanished. Some survived as planets in their own right: Venus, larger and hotter; Mars, smaller but stable; Mercury, dense and close to the Sun. But many more were lost, their bodies sacrificed to Earth's hunger. The Earth's survival was not gentle, it was a victory through absorption. On Earth's surface, nights were lit by fire. Impacts glowed on the horizon, meteors rained across the skies, lava fountains erupted from cracks. The air shimmered with heat, thick with steam and ash. Lightning flickered constantly in the volcanic clouds, thunder rolling across oceans of lava. There was no quiet, no peace, no stillness, but there was growth. The Earth's hunger was relentless, but it was also fruitful. Each night ended with the planet larger than before, heavier, stronger, hungrier. It was a furnace, but it was becoming a furnace. The Earth was no longer just another protoplanet. It had grown into something more, a body large enough to dominate its orbit, large enough to command the path of smaller fragments, large enough to endure collisions that would have destroyed others. It was a true planet now, not finished, not perfect, but distinct. Its hunger had given it identity, its growth had given it permanence. The Earth was becoming the Earth. Millions of years passed in this way, each one filled with impacts, each one adding to Earth's mass. The hunger never ceased, the feast never ended, and through that long patience, the Earth grew into a sphere thousands of miles across, its pull stretching far beyond its orbit, its dominance undeniable. It was no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. The Earth was now one of the great survivors of the inner solar system, its place secured by hunger and endurance. The constant impacts, the endless collisions, had heated the planet from within. Its interior boiled with molten rock, its mantle churned in convection, its crust trembled with quakes. The surface was never still, never cool, never quiet. But this furnace was more than chaos. It was preparation. The heat that melted its surface also stirred its core, also built the foundations of its future. The furnace within was not only destruction, it was the beginning of structure. The Earth's hunger had fed more than its body, it had fed its heart. At last, after millions of years of hunger, Earth stood as one of the dominant worlds of the inner solar system. Larger than Mars, heavier than Mercury, rival to Venus, it was no longer simply a survivor of the storm. It was a master of it. Its orbit was its own, its mass undeniable, its pull relentless. The hungry sphere had become a planet, one that would endure for billions of years, one that would carry life itself. The Earth was no longer dust, no longer fragments, no longer only fire. It was a world. And so the age of hunger brought the Earth into being. From dust, it had grown, from pebbles it had gathered, from collisions it had endured, and from hunger it had thrived. The Earth was now permanent. Scarred, yes, restless, yes, but permanent. It would no longer be scattered into fragments, no longer be flung into the void, no longer be only a survivor. It was a planet whole and enduring. The hungry sphere had found its place. And so part VI closes with Earth established as a dominant world, its hunger satisfied, its orbit secured. It was no longer only a participant in the storm, it was its master. The next chapter would bring new trials, the Molten youth, when Earth's surface glowed endlessly with oceans of lava and its skies thickened with steam and storms. The hungry sphere had fed well. Earth was larger now, its orbit cleared of rivals, its mass undeniable. But the price of that feast was heat. Every collision had poured energy into its body, every impact had left scars of fire. Radioactive elements deep within its mass added their own glow, their decay a steady furnace that would burn for billions of years. The Earth was not only larger now, it was molten. The surface of the young Earth was a sea of lava, not streams, not lakes, but oceans, vast plains of molten rock stretching thousands of miles, glowing red-orange under the sun's light. The crust was too thin, too fragile to survive. Where it formed, it cracked within days or weeks, swallowed again by molten floods. Volcanoes erupted constantly, their plumes rising like mountains of fire, their flows feeding the endless seas of lava. Ash filled the skies, glowing red in the light of fire below. Thunder rolled through the volcanic clouds, lightning flashed in violent arcs, illuminating the molten surface. The Earth was not a planet of land and sea, it was a planet of fire. Above the molten plains, the atmosphere thickened. Impacts released gases into the sky, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, sulfur. Water vapor hissed upward from the boiling seas, filling the air with steam. The young sun's heat kept the skies heavy, dense with clouds of ash and vapor. Rain fell, but only briefly. Each drop hissed into steam as it touched the molten ground, returning to the sky in moments. Storms circled endlessly, their lightning striking oceans of lava, their winds scattering ash across continents that did not yet exist. The Earth breathed fire, and its breath was steam. At night, the Earth was brighter than the day. The sun no longer lit its surface, but its own glow was enough. The oceans of lava shimmered, casting red light into the skies. Clouds reflected that glow, turning entire horizons into crimson sheets. From space, Earth looked like an ember, a glowing coal wrapped in mist. It was not blue, not green, not white. It was red and black, a furnace adrift in the void, glowing with its own heat. The Earth's nights were brighter than its days. Even in this molten youth, the Earth tried to wear a crust. Thin sheets of basalt formed on the lava seas, cooling for days, sometimes weeks. They spread like fragile rafts across the molten surface, dark against the red glow. But the crust never lasted. Quakes split it, volcanoes drowned it, impacts shattered it. Again and again, the Earth shed its skin, never allowed to harden, never allowed to endure. The planet was restless, and its crust could not keep pace. Everywhere, volcanoes erupted. Their fountains rose higher than mountains, their plumes stretched for miles into the skies. Rivers of lava spilled outward, joining the oceans, feeding their endless glow. The gases they exhaled thickened the atmosphere further, adding layers of carbon, nitrogen, sulfur. The air was heavy, dense, toxic, a storm of heat and vapor. But without those volcanoes, there would have been no atmosphere at all. Their breath, violent as it was, gave Earth its cloak of sky. The heat did not come only from the surface. Deep within the Earth, radioactive elements decayed, releasing energy that kept the mantle molten. Convection currents stirred endlessly, rising and falling, carrying heat outward. The Earth's core, already forming, glowed with its own furnace, pressing outward, feeding the mantle's restlessness. The entire planet was alive with motion, boiling from within as well as without. It was not only a world of surface fire, it was a furnace to its very heart. From afar, the Earth's glow was mesmerizing, but up close, its chaos was overwhelming. Impacts thundered across its surface, volcanoes erupted ceaselessly, storms circled endlessly. And yet in the vacuum of space, all was silent. The roar of eruptions, the crash of impacts, the roll of thunder, none of it carried beyond the atmosphere. To watch from orbit was to see fire and chaos in utter silence, a furnace raging in mute majesty. The Earth was deafening to itself, but silent to the stars. Again and again, rains fell, clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and storms poured torrents of water into the molten seas. But the water could not last. Each drop sizzled into steam, each river evaporated before it could flow. The cycle repeated endlessly: evaporation, condensation, rain, evaporation again. The Earth was learning to reign, but not yet to hold its reign. It was a planet of fire trying to become a planet of water, but not yet ready. Millions of years passed in this molten youth. Impacts scarred the surface, volcanoes remade it, storms circled endlessly, and yet the Earth endured. It did not cool into silence, nor shatter into fragments. It remained, growing stronger, growing larger, growing more stable with each passing age. Its youth was molten, but its endurance was permanent. The Earth's molten youth was not only destruction, it was a creation. The atmosphere was thickening, the core was glowing, the mantle was stirring, the crust was trying to form. The planet was building itself in fire, shaping its future through chaos. The furnace was not the end of Earth's story, it was the beginning of its endurance. And so part VII closes with Earth glowing like an ember, its surface a sea of lava, its skies heavy with steam, its nights lit brighter than its days. It was still a furnace, still molten, still restless, but it was enduring. The next chapter would bring another stage, the nights without worlds, when Earth glowed alone in the disk, one ember among many, a young world becoming distinct from its rivals. The Earth was young, molten, and restless. Its surface glowed like fire, its skies churned with storms, its crust cracked and remade itself endlessly. And yet, for all its noise and fury, for all its chaos and heat, the Earth was alone. The solar system was crowded then. Dozens of protoplanets circled the sun, countless asteroids drifted, comets wandered from the cold beyond. And still, each world was solitary, separated by millions of miles of empty space. The Earth burned, but it burned in isolation. From afar, the Earth looked like an ember. Its molten surface glowed red and orange, brighter than any quiet planet could be. Clouds of ash and steam wrapped it in a faint haze, reflecting its light, giving it a halo against the black of space. There were no blue oceans, no green lands, no white clouds. There was only the glow of fire, the shimmer of lava, the restless flicker of lightning. The Earth was a beacon, a solitary ember in the vastness of the void. Up close, Earth was chaos, eruptions, quakes, storms, impacts. But beyond its atmosphere, in the vacuum of space, all was silent. The roar of volcanoes, the crash of stones, the hiss of rain into lava, none of it reached beyond the air. From space, the Earth was a storm without sound, a fire without voice. The sight was violent, but the silence was profound. It was a reminder that even in its fury, the Earth was alone. Other worlds glowed too. Venus circled nearby, larger, glowing with its own molten seas. Mars was smaller but restless, its crust cracking under impacts. Mercury, closest to the Sun, was battered by heat and collisions. The inner solar system was a forge, its planets half-formed, glowing, scarred, and yet none were close enough to be seen as neighbors. Each circled the Sun in its own solitude, each endured its own storms in silence. The Earth had rivals, but not companions. It burned alone in the night. Sometimes across the dark horizon of space, another world drifted into view. Venus, bright and molten, might shine like a red star for weeks before vanishing again. Mars might glow faintly, a smaller ember crossing the night slowly. Asteroids flashed by, sometimes colliding, sometimes scattering into fragments. But these visits were rare, brief, distant. The Earth could not hear them, could not touch them, could not share its storms with them. They were lights in the dark, wanderers in the void, companions only in sight, never in presence. The nights were vast, and the Earth was small. Beyond the nearby rivals, the entire solar system shimmered with dust. Though much had gathered into worlds and stones, a haze of particles remained, circling the sun like a faint veil. This dust reflected the sun's light, turning the skies into a dim glow, a golden fog stretching across the horizon. It was faint, but it was there, a memory of the time when Earth was only dust, when the solar system was only whispers. The disk was fading, but its glow still lingered, a soft light in the nights of a molten world. The Earth drifted within it, alone but not forgotten. On Earth's surface, nights were not dark. The lava plains glowed red, their light casting shadows across mountains of molten stone. Volcanoes lit the horizon with fountains of fire, their plumes glowing against stormy skies. Lightning split the clouds, illuminating the steaming seas in flashes of silver. The Earth did not need the sun to shine. It glowed with its own fire, lit from within, bright enough to paint its nights in color. But that glow reached no one. It was a lantern burning in emptiness. Becoming a planet was not a communal act. Each world grew in solitude, each endured its trials alone. There were no voices, no companions, no shared warmth. Only gravity connected them, only collisions reminded them of one another's existence. For Earth, this loneliness was profound. It was building itself in fire, layer by layer, but it was building in silence. Its nights were filled with glow, its skies with storms, its surface with fury, and still it was alone. The loneliness of becoming was part of the price of being. And yet in that solitude, Earth grew. Its patience was unbroken, its growth unstoppable. Alone or not, it endured. Alone or not, it gathered, absorbed, persisted. The silence was not emptiness. It was space to grow, space to become, space to endure without interruption. The Earth's loneliness was also its strength. It had time, and time was all it needed. The ember glowed brighter each night, not for companions, not for rivals, but for itself. By the end of these long, lonely nights, the Earth had become more than a fragment. Its surface was molten, but its mass was permanent. Its crust was fragile, but its heart was growing strong. Its glow was fierce, but its endurance was stronger still. The loneliness of becoming had made it whole. And so part VIII closes with Earth glowing alone in the void, an ember adrift, a world of fire without companions. It was not yet finished, not yet cooled, not yet stable, but it was enduring, and endurance was everything. The next chapter would bring a new trial, the surviving few when many protoplanets perished, and Earth's survival became more than chance, it became destiny. The solar system had once been crowded, a nursery of countless planetesimals, worldlets, and protoplanets, each one a contender, each one striving to grow. But the storm of stones had thinned the numbers. One by one, rivals were shattered, consumed, or cast into the void. Now only the survivors remained. They were larger, stronger, hungrier. They were the destined few, the ones who would endure. And among them was Earth. The first act of planetary birth was one of abundance. Too many bodies, too many seeds, too many competitors. But abundance cannot last. Gravity favors the largest, time favors the persistent, and collisions favor the strong. The smaller worldlets were shattered in endless impacts. Their fragments fell into larger bodies, or drifted into the asteroid belt, or were hurled into the cold beyond. The middling ones were consumed, their masses absorbed by rivals. Only the greatest survived, each ruling its orbit, each pulling more fragments into itself. This was the great winnowing, the selection of the few from the many. Earth's own survival was not guaranteed. Again and again, it was struck by rivals, each impact large enough to destroy a lesser body. Each time it was scarred, melted, reshaped. Each time it endured. Its molten surface healed its wounds. Its growing gravity absorbed its attackers. Its endurance turned each trial into strength. The Earth did not survive because it was spared. It survived because it endured. Among Earth's neighbors were other survivors. Venus, larger and hotter, gathered its mass with relentless hunger. Mars, smaller but swift, claimed its orbit farther out. Mercury, dense and battered, circled closest to the Sun. Beyond them, Jupiter and Saturn loomed, their gravity shaping the fates of all. Their pull scattered smaller bodies, flinging countless worldlets into the outer solar system or inward into fiery destruction. Earth stood among these survivors, neither the largest nor the smallest, but strong enough, persistent enough to remain. Those that did not endure left their marks in silence. Their fragments became asteroids, their dust added to the fading haze of the disk. Some drifted into the Kuiper belt, exiled to the cold edge of the system. Others fell into the sun, their stories ended in its fire. The solar system was littered with their remains. The asteroid belt itself was a graveyard of worlds that might have been fragments of protoplanets that had once contended for greatness but never survived the storm. Their loss fed the survivors, their absence defined the present. The Earth grew larger with each survival, each rival absorbed, each fragment consumed, added to its gravity. It was no longer just a participant in the storm. It was a master of its orbit, clearing space around itself, commanding the path of those who approached. Its endurance gave it strength, and its strength gave it dominance. It was no longer fragile, no longer one contender among many. It was one of the few, one of the destined. The Earth was rising into permanence. On Earth's surface, the trials never ceased. Impacts still thundered, volcanoes still erupted, storms still circled. The nights glowed with lava, meteors, and lightning. And yet the skies grew quieter. The endless rain of smaller fragments was thinning. The great collisions were less frequent. For the first time in millions of years, the Earth's nights began to show hints of silence. The storm was not over, but it was easing. The Earth was surviving into a new stage, a stage of fewer rivals, fewer collisions, fewer threats. Every scar told a story. Every molten plane was a memory of an impact endured. Every fissure was a reminder of a trial that survived. The Earth carried its history in its wounds, though many would later be erased by time, by oceans, by tectonics. The moon, when it came, would remember better. But even now, the Earth knows its own endurance. Its molten plains, its cracked crust, its restless mantle, all whispered the same truth. It had survived what others had not. By now, the solar system had settled into a pattern. Only a handful of planets remained in the inner system. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the chosen few. Each scarred, each battered, each a survivor of the storm. Beyond them, Jupiter and Saturn reigned, their gravity holding dominion over the outer system. Farther still, Uranus and Neptune lingered, cold giants shaping the fates of comets and distant ice. The abundance of the disk had become the scarcity of planets. From countless seeds, only a few worlds had grown. And Earth was among them. The Earth was no longer uncertain, no longer fragile. It had survived the great wind ring, endured the trials, grown stronger with every blow. It was a survivor, not by chance, but by persistence. It was not yet finished, not yet whole, not yet ready for oceans or life, but it was permanent now. It would not be shattered, would not be lost, would not be forgotten. The Earth would endure. And so, from countless beginnings, Earth had survived into permanence. It was one of the few, one of the destined, one of the planets that would carry the story of the solar system forward. Its nights were still filled with fire, its days with storms, its surface with molten scars, but its place was secure, its identity was permanent, its survival was assured. The Earth was no longer just becoming, it had become one of the surviving few. And so Part IX closes with Earth standing among the last rivals of the inner solar system, scarred but strong, battered but permanent. The next chapter would bring a new stage, the first spheres, when Earth's shape grew rounder, smoother, and began to take on the form of a true planet. The Earth had endured storms of stones, survived countless collisions, and risen as one of the few survivors of the crowded early solar system. It had grown strong, heavy, and permanent, but still, it was jagged, scarred, uneven, a molten body not yet whole in form. Now gravity began its quiet work. Slowly, steadily, patiently, it pulled the planet into balance. Mountains were pressed down, craters were filled, molten seas smoothed into curves. The Earth was becoming round. It was becoming a sphere. Gravity is the artist of planets. Left to itself, matter scatters, fragments, drifts, but under the pull of gravity, matter seeks balance. The heaviest sinks inward, the lighter rises outward, and the whole takes on the only shape that balance allows, a sphere. For Earth, this was not immediate. It was not a sudden transformation. It was the slow, patient sculpting of time. Each impact melted jaggedness, Each eruption filled hollows, each flow of lava smoothed rough edges. Gravity was sculpting, and the Earth was becoming whole. The oceans of lava that covered Earth's surface were not chaos alone. They were also a smoothing force. Lava flowed into craters, filling scars. It spread across plains, evening them into curves. It cooled into sheets of stone, fragile but rounder than before. Every new impact scarred the surface again, but every new eruption smoothed it once more. Destruction and repair danced together, each one feeding the other, each one shaping the planet into greater balance. The fire that scarred also sculpted. The fire that destroyed it was also created. On the surface, this change was almost invisible. Mountains still rose and fell, craters still spread for miles, lava still flowed across the land. But if you could have stood far enough away, beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, the difference was clear. The jagged world was becoming round. Its horizon no longer wavered with sharp peaks and irregular ridges. It curved gently now, a soft line between the molten plains and the star-filled void. The Earth was taking on the shape of permanence. The roundness came not only from the surface, but from within. Heavier elements sank toward the center, lighter ones rose toward the surface. Iron and nickel streamed downward, silicates lifted upward, gases drifted above. The Earth was not only becoming a sphere on the outside, it was becoming layered within. Its roundness was not only surface, but structure. The planet was learning to organize itself. Even the impacts that battered Earth played their part. Each collision melted jaggedness, spreading molten seas across the surface. Each impact redistributed mass, pressing balance into the planet's shape. They were violent sculptors, but sculptors nonetheless. With every strike, Earth became rounder, smoother, more whole. The scars of impacts were not permanent disfigurements. They were the chisels that shaped the sphere. Elsewhere in the solar system, the same work was being done. Venus grew round and bright, glowing with its own molten seas. Mars, smaller but steady, smoothed into a sphere. Mercury, closest to the Sun, was battered into balance. Even the smaller moons and asteroids began to round, though only those large enough for gravity to command their shapes. The smallest remained irregular, jagged, broken, but the survivors large enough to matter became spheres. The solar system was filled with globes, each one the work of gravity's hand. The beauty of a sphere is its inevitability. No matter how many scars, no matter how many impacts, no matter how many eruptions, the planet always seeks roundness again. The surface may be scarred, but the form is balanced. The Earth was learning this perfection. It was scarred, battered, and molten, but its form was round. Its horizon was curved, its mass evenly distributed, its balance undeniable. It was no longer only a survivor, it was a world complete in form. From space, the difference was luminous. Earth glowed still with molten seas, but its outline was no longer jagged. It was a circle of fire, a glowing sphere wrapped in clouds of steam and ash. The lava plains shimmered in curves, the volcanic plumes rose from a globe. Even its chaos was bound now by roundness, even its fury shaped into balance. The Earth was a sphere of fire, but a sphere nonetheless. This rounding took millions of years. It was not fast, it was not dramatic, it was not sudden. It was patient, quiet, inevitable. With every impact, every eruption, every flow, the Earth became smoother, more balanced, more whole. Patience was gravity's gift, and the Earth accepted it. And so at last, Earth stood as a true planet, round, balanced, layered, glowing. Its surface was still molten, its skis still stormy, its crust still fragile, but its form was complete. It was no longer a fragment, no longer a jagged worldlet, no longer uncertain. It was a planet, a sphere, a survivor shaped into wholeness by fire and gravity. The Earth had become itself. And so Part X closes with Earth standing as a sphere among spheres, balanced and whole in form, ready for the next stage of becoming. The next chapter would bring new chaos, the endless impacts, when Earth's roundness would be tested by scars so large they could melt continents, and its endurance would be challenged yet again. The Earth was a sphere now, round and balanced, its horizon curved and steady, but balance did not mean peace. The storm of the early solar system still raged, and collisions were far from finished. Even as Earth glowed like a lantern in the void, other protoplanets circled nearby. Some were smaller, some larger, each following its own fragile orbit, and in the crowded inner system, paths crossed often. When they did, worlds collided. For Earth, roundness was only the beginning. Endurance was still required. The age of endless impacts had arrived. On Earth's surface, the skies were never empty. Meteors streaked constantly, glowing trails of fire across the stormy heavens. Some were no larger than pebbles, burning away before they reached the ground. Others were massive, striking with the force of mountains, tearing craters hundreds of miles wide into the molten crust. Every night was lit by fire. The horizon glowed not with stars, but with impacts, each one painting the sky in red and orange. The Earth was round now, but it was far from calm. It was a world under siege, a planet still being tested. Each great impact poured unimaginable energy into the Earth's body. Entire regions of crust were shattered, melted, flung into the skies as glowing arcs of rock. The ground shook with quakes that rolled across the planet, splitting lava seas into rivers of fire. Sometimes the impacts were so great they remade entire hemispheres. Lava oceans spread wider, mountains vanished in molten floods, valleys boiled into seas of magma. The surface was never still, never permanent. Earth's roundness endured, but its skin was remade again and again. Nights on Earth were storms of light. Fireballs streaked endlessly across the atmosphere, impacts glowed like new suns on the horizon, and lightning flashed in volcanic clouds. The sky was never dark, never quiet. From space, the Earth glowed brighter than before, each impact adding bursts of light to its molten glow. It was a planet alive with fire, a beacon in the void, its surface remade in endless storms. It was beautiful and terrible and unrelenting. Most impacts scarred the surface, melted the crust, and passed into history, but some were larger, some were so immense they nearly destroyed the planet itself. These colossal collisions sent shockwaves through the mantle, stirring convection currents deep within. They vaporized oceans of rock, scattering debris into orbit, some of which would rain back down as molten fire. Each strike was a near-death, and each survival a rebirth. Earth's history was written in these scars. Each one tested its endurance, each one forged its strength. And yet through every impact, Earth's roundness endured. Gravity pulled the fragments back, smoothed the scars, healed the wounds. Lava filled craters, magma cooled into curves, the balance returned again and again. The surface was restless, but the form was steady. The planet was scarred, but unbroken. The endless impacts could not undo what gravity had made. Earth was no longer fragile, it was resilient. Not all protoplanets were so lucky. Many were destroyed by impacts too great to endure. Some shattered into fragments that drifted as asteroids. Others were flung into eccentric orbits, exiled to the edges of the solar system. A few fell into the sun, their stories ended in its fire. But Earth endured. Its mass was large enough, its gravity strong enough, its form resilient enough. It survived impacts that destroyed rivals. It absorbed those it could, scattered those it could not, and grew stronger with each survival. The endless impacts were not the end of Earth, they were making it. Deep within Earth, the impacts kept its furnace alive. Each collision added heat, stirring the mantle, feeding the molten core. The surface was a sea of fire, but so too was the heart. The Earth's glow was not only from without, but from within. Its furnace burned brighter than ever, its energy renewed by the endless trials. The planet was not being undone, it was being prepared. Millions of years passed in this storm. The impacts did not cease. Some centuries brought smaller collisions, others brought devastation beyond measure, but through them all, Earth endured. Patience was its strength, each impact was endured, each scar was healed, each trial survived. It was a patience born not of silence, but of fire, not of peace, but of persistence. By the end of these endless impacts, Earth was no longer a fragile worldlet, no longer uncertain, no longer one among many. It was one of the survivors, one of the destined, one of the permanent worlds of the solar system. Its scars were deep, its history violent, its surface restless, but it was whole, round, and enduring. The endless impacts had not destroyed it, they had given it permanence. And so Earth emerged from the age of endless impacts as a planet forged in fire. Its surface was molten, its core was glowing, its skies were stormy, its crust fragile. But it was a planet, whole and round, scarred but strong, tested but triumphant. The Earth was no longer just becoming, it had become. And so part Xi closes with Earth scarred but unbroken, battered but stronger, enduring the endless impacts that destroyed so many rivals. The next chapter would bring a quieter transformation, the growing presence, when Earth's gravity began to shape not only itself, but its neighbors, becoming an undeniable force in the young solar system. The storm of endless impacts had scarred the Earth, melted its crust, and shaken it to its core. Yet the planet endured. It had grown stronger, rounder, heavier. Its furnace burned brighter than ever, its surface glowed with molten seas, its skies thundered with storms. And now something new began to happen. The Earth was no longer only a survivor, it was no longer only a participant in the storm, it was becoming something greater, a presence. Its mass was large enough to command attention, its gravity strong enough to influence neighbors, its orbit stable enough to reshape the space around it. The Earth was not just being shaped, it was beginning to shape. Gravity is invisible, but it is never silent. With each fragment Earth absorbed, its pull grew stronger. With each impact survived, its presence deepened. Now small bodies that once drifted past were drawn inward. Meteors curved into its skies, fragments spiraled into its surface. Even larger worldlets felt its tug, their orbits subtly bent by Earth's mass. The Earth had become more than a world of fire. It had become a well in the fabric of space, pulling its surroundings toward itself. In time, this deepening gravity cleared Earth's orbit. Smaller bodies that crossed its path were absorbed, scattered, or destroyed. The endless fragments that had once filled the skies were fewer now, their numbers thinned by Earth's hunger. The orbit of the planet was no longer crowded, no longer filled with rivals and fragments. It was becoming its own domain, its own space, claimed by the presence of the Earth. The planet was carving a path of permanence, leaving emptiness where once there had been chaos. Earth's presence reached farther still. Neighboring worldlets felt its pull, their paths shifted, their orbits altered. Some were nudged into new courses, away from the planet's reach. Others were pulled closer, only to be consumed in collisions. Even Mars, Venus, and Mercury, survivors in their own right, felt Earth's growing presence. Each kept its own path, each endured, but all were touched by the invisible hand of Earth's gravity. The Earth was not the only survivor, but it was becoming a force among them. On Earth's surface, the results were visible in the skies. Meteors still fell, but more often now, they curved inward from afar. Fragments that might have drifted past were pulled into fire. The nights were filled with streaks of light, drawn arcs of stone burning in descent. Impacts still shook the crust, lava still spread across the land, storms still circled the skies. But now, those impacts were not random. They were claimed, they were pulled. The Earth was no longer waiting for collisions, it was summoning them. Every fragment absorbed added to Earth's strength. Every rival consumed added to its identity. Its mass grew larger, its pull stronger, its endurance deeper. The planet was no longer only a place of becoming. It was a cradle of mass, a body that fed on the storm to become something permanent. It was no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. It was undeniable. Beyond Earth's orbit, Jupiter loomed, vast, heavy, a giant whose gravity shaped the entire solar system. It was Jupiter's pull that had stirred the asteroid belt, flung comets inward, and scattered fragments across the skies. Compared to Jupiter, Earth was small, but in the inner system, Earth's presence was becoming a counterpart. It did not command the whole, but it commanded its domain. It was not a giant, but it was not insignificant. The Earth's presence was growing into permanence. As Earth cleared its orbit, collisions grew less frequent. The endless impacts slowed. The nights grew quieter. For the first time, the planet knew pauses between the storms. These silences were not empty. They were filled with the work of gravity, the slow shaping of orbits, the gentle bending of paths. The Earth was growing not only through fire, but through patience. The presence of the planet was no longer defined only by violence. It was defined by endurance. Deep within, Earth's furnace continued to burn. The impacts had lessened, but the heat remained. Radioactive decay fed the mantle, convection churned beneath the crust, the core glowed molten at the center. The Earth did not need constant collisions to remain alive. Its own body was enough. Its presence was sustained from within. The planet had outgrown its dependence on the storm. It was feeding itself now. With its orbit cleared, its rivals diminished, and its mass undeniable, Earth was becoming itself. It was no longer only a participant in the storm, no longer only a victim of collisions, no longer only a survivor. It was a presence, a force, a planet that could shape as well as be shaped. The Earth had become one of the few, and more than that, it had become one of the great. And so, from dust to motes, from pebbles to stones, from collisions to survival, Earth had become a presence. It was still molten, still scarred, still stormy, but it was permanent, undeniable, influential. Its presence reached across the inner solar system. Its mass carved out a domain. Its gravity bent the paths of rivals and fragments alike. The Earth was no longer just becoming, it was becoming itself. And so part XII closes with Earth established as a presence in the solar system, not the largest, not the smallest, but a planet whose influence could no longer be ignored. The next chapter would bring new challenges, the dawn's survivors, when Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Earth stood as the final four of the inner planets, each marked by scars, each carrying its destiny. The storm of stones was easing. The endless collisions were fewer now, the skies quieter, the nights less crowded with fire. Millions of years of chaos had passed, and from that storm, only a handful of worlds remained. The solar system had chosen its survivors. Once the inner system had been filled with contenders, worldlets large and small, protoplanets glowing with molten seas, fragments wandering in unstable orbits. Each had fought to endure, each had hoped to grow. But time is relentless. Gravity favors the strong, and collisions favor the enduring. One by one, the smaller bodies were shattered, absorbed, or exiled into the asteroid belt. Their stories ended, their fragments scattered. The many had dwindled into the few. At last, the storm settled into permanence. 4 planets endured in the inner system. Mercury, closest to the Sun, small but dense, its crust scorched by fire, its nights frozen, its surface battered by scars. Venus, Earth's twin in size, glowing with molten plains, thickening its atmosphere with volcanic breath. Earth scarred but strong, its furnace glowing, its presence undeniable, its destiny still unfolding. Mars, smaller than Earth, but steady, its surface cooling, its crust forming into valleys and plains. These were the dawn's survivors, each scarred, each battered, but each permanent. Together they formed a family, the terrestrial planets, the rocky survivors of the storm. They were not identical, but they were kin, born of the same dust, shaped by the same collisions, tested by the same trials. Mercury small and dense, Venus bright and hot, Earth the fertile and balanced, Mars distant and cold. Each carried its scars, each bore its history, but together they were the survivors of the dawn. Earth was not the largest, Venus rivaled it in size. It was not the smallest, Mercury held that place. It was not the farthest nor the closest, but it was balanced, enduring, steady. Its furnace burned, its surface glowed, its atmosphere thickened. It stood as one of the chosen, one of the permanent, one of the worlds that would carry the story forward. The Earth's destiny was not yet revealed, but its place among the survivors was secure. For the first time, Earth knew silences that lasted longer than days. The great collisions were fewer now, the sky clearer, the nights calmer. Lava still flowed, storms still circled, volcanoes still erupted, but the endless rain of fragments had thinned. The silence was strange. After millions of years of chaos, the Earth almost seemed to pause, as though listening for the next blow. But the storm was fading, the chaos was passing, the silence was the sound of survival. The asteroid belt remained as a graveyard of those that had not survived. Each rock, there was a fragment of a world that might have been, a memory of a story cut short. But Earth was not among the lost. It had endured, absorbed, persisted. Its scars were not endings, they were beginnings. The Earth carried the memory of fire, but also the promise of permanence. Though 4 planets remained, they were still far apart. Millions of miles separated them, their orbits vast and lonely. They shared a story, but not a closeness. Each endured in solitude, each circled the sun in silence. Earth's companions were not companions in presence, but in destiny. They endured together, but apart. It was a family spread wide, a family bound only by the sun. And yet among them, Earth was rising. Its balance of size, distance, and composition gave it strength. Its furnace kept it alive, its atmosphere grew thicker, its orbit was steady. It did not yet have oceans, did not yet have life, did not yet know peace, but it had the foundations of all these. It had endurance, balance, and permanence. The Earth was not only a survivor, it was a promise. The chaos of the early solar system was ending. The giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, had taken their distant thrones. The inner system had chosen its 4. The dust had thinned, the fragments scattered, the storm passed. What remained was order, what remained was permanence, what remained were planets. And Earth was one of them. So the story of the dawn settled into its survivors. 4 planets, each scarred, each enduring, each carrying the memory of chaos within them. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. The dawn's survivors. Earth stood among them, balanced and strong, scarred but whole, enduring but restless. Its journey was far from over, but it had passed through chaos and emerged permanently. It was a survivor of the dawn. And so part XIII closes with Earth, standing among the 4 rocky planets of the inner solar system, its place secure, its identity formed. The next chapter would bring new scars, the dawn of endless fire, when colossal impacts and volcanic breath would cloak the planet in storms and remake its surface again and again. The Earth had come far, from whispers of dust to murmurs of stone, from storms of collisions to silences of survival. It had endured. It was round now, layered within, scarred without, and its orbit was steady. It was no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, no longer only becoming. The Earth was a planet, and yet its story was not finished. The fires still burned, the skis still stormed, the scars still formed. It was whole but restless. It was permanent but still young. It was a world but still a world becoming. Deep inside the Earth, its layers had begun to settle. Heavy metals sank inward, forming a core. Silicate rocks floated above, forming a mantle. Lighter materials rose farther still, spreading into a fragile crust. It was not yet stable, not yet quiet, not yet cool, but it was layered now, structured, organized. The Earth was no longer chaos throughout. It had a heart, a body, a skin. It was becoming not only a sphere, but a world of layers. On the outside, the planet was still restless. Volcanoes erupted endlessly, lava plains spread across the crust, craters scarred the surface. The storms above poured rain that boiled into steam, lightning that split the skis, winds that howled across molten plains. It was a surface of fire, but it was a surface that endured. Where once the crust had shattered easily, now it reformed more strongly. Where once impacts had undone the planet, Now they scarred but did not destroy. The surface was restless, but it was permanent. For the first time, Earth knew true pauses. The great collisions had slowed, the endless storm of fragments had thinned. There were still impacts, still scars, still trials, but they came with more distance between. In those pauses, the Earth breathed. Lava cooled into a new crust, gases thickened into the atmosphere, and storms circled more slowly. It was not peace, not yet, but it was quiet enough for becoming. The silences were not endings, they were beginnings. Around the sun, Earth was no longer one among countless rivals. It was one among four: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, the rocky survivors of the dawn. Each carried scars, each endured its own destiny. Mercury was small, baked by the sun, scarred and airless. Venus was large, glowing and hot, its skis thick with volcanic breath. Mars was smaller, its crust cooling, its surface carved into valleys and plains. And Earth was balanced, scarred but strong, molten but layered, restless but enduring. The Earth was not the greatest, not the least. It was the balanced one, the centered one, the one that would carry something new. From space, the Earth glowed still. Its lava seas shimmered red, its volcanic plumes rose like fiery towers, its clouds circled endlessly. It was scarred and molten, but it was whole, and its shape was perfect in roundness. It looked no longer like a fragment, it looked like a planet. Its glow was no longer only survival, it was an identity. The Earth was not just present, it was itself. Millions of years more would pass before the Earth cooled, before oceans gathered, before life appeared. But already, its place was secure. Already, its endurance was proven. Already, its permanence was undeniable. Time would shape it further. Impacts would still scar it. Volcanoes would still erupt. Storms would still rage. But none of these would unmake it. The Earth was permanent now, and permanence was everything. Patience would reveal its future. Patience would bring its oceans, its continents, its skis of blue. Patience would bring its story forward. But even now, the Earth was a world. Though its future stretched billions of years ahead, Earth carried with it the memory of its past, the whispers of dust, the murmurs of pebbles, the roars of collisions, the fires of storms, the silences of survival. All of these were written into its body, into its layers, into its scars. The Earth was not only a world, it was a story of dust becoming a planet, of fragments becoming whole, of chaos becoming permanence. It was a memory wrapped in fire. And so, at last, the Earth stood as a planet complete enough to endure, layered enough to survive, strong enough to persist. It was not yet finished, but it was whole enough. It was not yet peaceful, but it was permanent enough. The Earth was not only becoming, it was a world becoming. And so part XIV closes the saga of Earth coalescing. From dust to fragments, from collisions to spheres, from chaos to permanence, the Earth has been forged. It is a planet now, scarred but strong, restless but enduring, young but whole. Its journey will continue: oceans, moons, bombardments, life, but its foundation is set. The Earth has coalesced.